Well, look at this. It's 7 o'clock. I guess we might as well start. Welcome to the March. Of course, Terry's zooming right ahead to the March 2021 virtual show table. We'd like to welcome our new members, Kathy DeVries, Tony Lombardino, and Colm Kelly. And we're going to be zooming into cyberspace with the good Dr. Courtney Hackney, our favorite speaker, who's also going to be talking to the club next month. So Courtney, right. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to actually giving a program in person again.
Yeah.
Although there are some disadvantages and advantages to everything you do. And I got an email from someone asking about plants. So I'll be sending Sue a list of seedlings and divisions I have available probably next week. So look for it. It's coming.
If you do that, I'll go ahead and post it on the website and send it out to everybody.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, it is nice that we're getting to see sort of where people grow orchids. And this is foul season. And Walter's got a nice display of lots of phals. And it looks like there's a cattleya snuck in there too. You know, Sue, I was thinking it might be fun to do a map and put the locations of all our members, because I think we've got members from all over now.
And we've got pictures from, I'll give the names of some of the people that we've got pictures from. We've got quite a assortment.
That's cool. That really is cool. That's another advantage of the Zoom.
Sorry about that.
Okay, how about the next photo?
I am at Citrus Valley High School in Redlands.
Yeah. What are they learning in high school English these days?
Hopefully,
Wait a minute, Courtney.
you know, that's just
Courtney, you have to unmute. I muted you by mistake.
You're married.
Okay, it's pretty hard to mute me, Sue, but you succeeded there for a second.
I'm trying to figure out where that background noise is coming from.
And another nice photo of a lanai and orchids in the lanai. That's, as I said, it's kind of nice getting to see how and where people not only grow them, but show them. Unfortunately, this isn't, you know, where we can speak about each different phal, but we've got some coming up. So we'll get to see that in the next slide. Or maybe it's the third slide from now. Here we go. Phals in Linda Stewart's kitchen, Bob and Yvonne's display, Charlie Brigham's Keystone Airport display. It's just kind of cool looking at what people are doing and how they're displaying them. I feel a little guilty now that I almost never bring orchids inside. It feels selfish, but they're all mine. I get to enjoy them. Rose has to come outside to see them.
Well, people always ask me why I don't bring orchids in the house. I said, why would I? I'm out in the greenhouse all the time.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. And, you know, when we used to have parties and things, and I'd bring some in then. But since that's all stopped, I don't think about it. I do display them in my greenhouse. I'll move them down from up high so I can see them a little better. And that's kind of fun. But the phals sort of stay where they are. Just nice having a bench full of blooming phals again. Mm-hmm. Next slide. Now we get to see some pretty phals. Lucia Davis by Lucia Rosehertz. This is Sue's plant, and every time I see a really nice red like this, I just think about H.P. Norton. He spent 20 years developing reds, and he finally succeeded right, I guess, near his time when he gave up growing phals, just because he was getting a little older and keeping up a big greenhouse was hard. But this is a really nice one, not just the flower color and shape, but if you'll notice, the flower count is pretty nice for this type of phal. Reds have an awful lot of the summer blooming characteristics from the species in the background, and they tend to just have maybe 3 flowers open at a time. And this one looks like it's going to have quite a few more. And the other aspect of the plant that I think is the fact that the flowers are nicely shingled, and that often is something that's lost in getting the real good color that comes from those summer blooming phals. Really nice, Sue.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Next. Biliara, now Alciara, and let's just call this as an energetic Oncidianae. This is Pluto's drummer, Pacific pink. And every time I see one of these in a photo or in real life, I just can't believe you could make anything better. And then somebody comes along with something that is even more unique. But this has got color, it's got size, and you can't quite see that. I just know it from having seen this particular cross before. The little blotches in the middle of a white background on the petals, it's just really well put together. And look at the flower count, really nice. This is Sheila's.
Now Sheila's growing this in her greenhouse up in Pittsburgh.
Well, it's a nicely grown plant, that's for darn sure. And I think about what it's like outside of their greenhouse. It's darn cold right now.
Yeah.
Well, we're thinking about you, Sheila. Next. Here again, another one of this intergeneric Oncidianae, and this is Stefan Eisler. I can't tell you how many different clones of this cross I've seen, and each one has something going for it that is a little different than the next, but almost all of them, in fact, I'm sure all I've seen have this excellent color. I don't know how many different clones there are out there that have been distributed. This one doesn't have a clonal name, but I'm betting it is one of the clones. Just a striking contrast. And notice where the pollina are located. In that column, look how nice and white that is, set apart from the flower color. And looks like there's even more flowers on the stem than you can see. Just everything in this plant is perfect. And I give credit to hybridizers who've done this because they've done a phenomenal job.
That had 40 flowers on it.
Holy cow.
And
Yeah, I don't know how you could put that in. This is one of those plants that had we had it at the show table, you'd really be able to see how spectacular the whole plant was and all the flowers. But you get some idea by just looking at this inflorescence.
And Steve is growing this up in Washington State.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
There's 86 here today, Steve.
It's 60, and we're pretty excited. I've been working out in the backyard, so
that's pretty nice.
It's wonderful.
Next slide. Tolumnias are in flower. I still like to call them Moyar's weeds, just thinking about the patience it took Moyar to turn what were little problematic, ugly, gnarly species from the Bahamas and the Caribbean into the plethora of colors and sizes that we now have readily available, fairly easy to grow. These are two really pretty ones, Jerek Flyer and White Beauty on the right. These are Lindas. And the thing I still love about these guys is that once you get a really nice plant, they'll continue to flower, not just during the flower season, but you'll have flowers on them all the time. Sometimes they'll even branch. It is striking to see a big one because we don't usually see large ones. And the real trick for these is to grow them in a medium that is really well aerated, chunks of cork, something like that. And the two other things is they really love good water, despite the fact that they come from the Caribbean where the water there is terrible, but they live on rainwater in the Caribbean. And they absolutely hate to have any kind of pesticide sprayed on them. And that's why so many people lose them, because they're really subject to various kinds of scale.
Yeah.
So if you have scale on these, use a little jet of water or something like that. Be real cautious using any kind of pesticide on them. Next. Two more. And the one on the left is, I guess that's Tequila Sunrise. It's not registered, and that is becoming a real problem in the orchid world. Is all of these orchids that are being sold and shown, they have a name, but we have no idea really what they are. So it's hard to judge how pretty it is without knowing what the parents were like. But I suspect that whoever made the hybrid knew what they were doing. Hybridizing Tolumnias is a really tricky thing, and you really have to understand aspects of the genetics of these guys. I keep thinking I need to get a program together again. I used to have one talking about the different species, because they're one of the genera, and there are other plant groups like this where one set of the species has a certain chromosome count. Then there's another set that has double the chromosome count, and then another that has triple the chromosome count. And when you start breeding these together, if you don't understand which is which, you can make a mess of things.
Oh, boy.
The Tolumnia triquetra is one of the cutest ones that I can think of as a species. Maybe Pulchellum is the other one that is really cute as a species, but this one is just striking. It's got that really pretty lip, nice wide petals for the species. It's fairly easy to grow, and looks like Suzanne's growing this on cork, an excellent way to grow it. It is one of the smaller growing of the species. And again, same things I said about the previous slide, just go with these two. You just have to be a little careful on the water. Don't over fertilize them, and be careful using any kind of pesticide. Next. Dendrobiums. Boy, every time I see these each year, I'm amazed at how pretty they are. And now I understand why the Hawaiians really got into hybridizing these, because there's so many possible colors and combinations. And the good thing about what they've done is they've made a lot of the species that were a little more problematic to grow. They've taken those genes and bred them with other species and produced hybrids that are much easier to grow than the species. The one on the top left is Eucadardruma, and then below that is Super Isa, and that's a common one that we see all the time. I guess common because it grows and flowers so well. People love to have it in their collection, and they bring it. The Dendrobium anemosum, said anosmum alba, that's Genesis. I think we've had that at the club before, because that's a beautiful white crystal, as I recall. Being nicely grown, and as I mentioned earlier, the species are a little trickier than the hybrids in general. Next. I still call this Dendrobium aggregatum. It's technically now Lindleyi. Aggregatum is one of those ones that does like a really nice dry period. And I know Sue doesn't dry hers off, and it always seems to bloom well. But for me, the one I have, I got a feeling it's probably a jungle or a wild collected one. It really has to be dried out. I usually keep it outside during the dry season in the winter. We just didn't have a dry season in the winter until a week ago. And so it's only now that we've had some dryness starting to put out inflorescences. But B's got this one in flower, and this is really pretty. 15 inflorescences. How's yours doing, Sue? Is it in bloom yet?
Nope, but the buds are coming. The spikes are coming out.
Well, they have kind of the species has a longer blooming season, and even sometimes mine will bloom and then there'll be a couple more spikes come out next month or so. But that's really well done, B. Next slide. I actually had to look this one up. I think I've seen this before in shows. This is Dendrobium tetragonum, and it's an unusual looking species, but it is from Southeast Australia. And I think maybe that's where I've seen this before. It seems to me that Fred Clark fell in love with this when he was in Australia and has been using it to make hybrids. But in my opinion, it is so pretty by itself that I'm not sure you could make it any better, although I'm sure Fred is trying. But it's one of those ones that is disorderly, and there are a lot of orchid growers who don't like disordered flowers. The petals and the sepals aren't nice and uniform, but that is certainly a beautiful orchid. And this is another from B. Our growers have such eclectic taste, I guess is the way to say that. That's a nice way. Okay, next. Frags. We don't grow that many frags here, but this is a really pretty one. Eric Young by Memoria Dick Clements. And the thing that is, or should be somewhat interesting to everyone, is that this has 2 doses of Frag Bessie. And when Bessie was discovered, it was the first one that had real color to it. And it's a fairly small red to orange flower. But the hybridizers have been playing around getting the red color into larger flowers. And this is a classic example. This is Phragmipedium Sunset Glow. That is really pretty. Sheila's doing a great job on that thing. And if you grow frags and you've killed a lot of them, they are one of those species and hybrids that really has to have good water. And they also don't like a lot of heat. If you grow them here in Jacksonville, what you have to do in the summer is really put them in a very shady spot. They'll do okay, at least the ones I have that are still living. They survive the summers, and then they sort of take off once fall comes. So they can be grown here, and there are some that are a little more heat tolerant than others. But the more color they have in them, generally the more they don't like the 95-degree temperatures in our greenhouses. Next. Grows more of this group, Cloesia, than I think any other club in the country. And you can see why. This is beautiful. Rebecca Northern variety, grapefruit pink. It's hard to find orchids that produce this number of flowers in just such a beautiful arrangement all around the bulbs. And I can't say anything more. It's just a perfect flower, perfectly grown and perfectly displayed.
Yeah, it's a great
Next.
picture.
And fragrant.
Yes. And here's one of the parents of the one you just saw. This is Grace Dunn Chad's Ford, and this is a primary hybrid. And you can see where the plant in the previous slide got so many of its characteristics. And this one isn't even in full bloom yet. You can see buds on the right and buds in the center. Just spectacular. This is Sue's plant, and I know we've seen this at the club before, Sue.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just blows me away every time it comes in. And I can see why people get hooked on these and why they might give up real orchids like Cattleyas and stuff. But it's just a real nice plant, and this is being grown very well. So next. Alexandra Sava, Rebecca Northern by Denticulatum. First, I thought this was in the basket, but it's actually in a pot. And this is Bays. This beautiful thing. It looks like it is someday going to rival the Cloesias that we just saw in terms of having flowers all the way around. I suspect that's a challenge for a lot of these species to get enough inflorescences all out at one time without the plant getting so big that you start rotting bulbs. But if anybody can do it, I'm sure it's B. Next. Cattleya delosa, and these are mine. The one on the left is named Inferno Survivor. The one on right is a beautiful alba. And the name Inferno Survivor comes from the owner of the plant. Some of you have met Keith Davis, who has spoken a number of times at the club. And the power went off in his greenhouse because a squirrel electrocuted himself in the transformer in July when he wasn't there. And when he came back, every single plant was burned to a crisp in the greenhouse. This is one of probably 25 out of several thousand that survived. All that was left was the rhizome. And to show you how durable these plants are, this one grew back and is a beautiful example of the species. And I should note something here. I've probably said something about this before, but Cattleya delosa in the registrants is considered a natural hybrid. Now, it's interesting because if you make a hybrid between the two species that are supposed to be the parents, the offspring don't look anything like this. And that, of course, has been done all the time. And so when you see a orchid listed, and this might say Cattleya, and then it'll be a little X in front of the delosa, that is trying to tell you that that is a natural hybrid. But we have sieved these, we've selfed these, and they all come out looking just like the parents. So it's fairly certain now to the people who grow them that it is a natural species that probably derived from some of the parentage that's been suggested. And you can find, especially ceruleas, you can find them that are made by people, the hybrid, and they don't have the same petal size and so forth. My friend Ben Oliveros, who speaks here probably every time we can sneak him into the country, he just got an FCC on an alba that's the sister of this one in this photo that had 7 flowers on one stem, and the flowers were 11.5 centimeters in natural spread. So
Wow.
they can become quite floriferous. I just can't grow them as well as Ben can in Hawaii.
Wow. 7 flowers?
7 flowers on one stem.
Wow.
Nicely arranged. I'll send you a photo if you remind me, Sue.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Next slide. Oh, here we have a couple other really special things. The Brabrantiae is one that came from Kroll Smith. He made this phenomenal hybrid using a 4N Laudagesiae and a 4N Eclandii. And the flowers are spectacularly huge, and it got the best of both parents. You can see the Laudagesiae parent in the background. This is adorable, the one to the left. This has an FCC. It's a very large flower, big and round. And when you cross that with a really dark Eclandii, he got this amazing Grex. I couldn't figure out which one I wanted to spend all my money on because that's how much he was asking. I finally ended up picking one. Any of it doesn't, each of which had superior characteristics to anything that I'd seen before. I have a beautiful 2N Brabrantiae, which I love, but it's just a different flower. The 4N form often is extremely different from the 2N form. They're both to be appreciated, but I think the judges generally tend to like the 4Ns better because they're bigger, more substance, etc. Next. A Schroeder's cat, Sue.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
This is one that's, I think, the roundest one that I've seen yet. But what I have to show you is this is a species, Schroederi, which is in bloom right now by a big 4N standard white Cattleya. And what you see on the photo on the left is the natural carriage of most labiate Cattleyas. We're so ingrained into the judging standard of Cattleyas needing to be flat that we often forget that the wild types were not flat. The species that are in the background were not flat. This is a good example of a really good one that you would see if you had the species from the wild. That carriage is the natural form. And so if you really have to have flat flowers, it's pretty hard to appreciate the true beauty of the labiate Cattleyas. But this is a nice hybrid. This is my hybrid that is one of my favorites. And Sue, I found about 12 more of them that I haven't seen bloom in my seedling pots.
I've got 5 of them.
So is that around 8.5 inches?
Yeah, that big one.
I've got one that I just repotted that didn't bloom this year. That first bloom, Colossus, basically was almost 8 inches.
Wow.
One bloom. If you have 2 blooms, it probably wouldn't be as big.
Yeah.
I like big Cattleya flowers, and that is a big one.
That's a big one.
Next. I had to put this in there for everyone to see. This is just something that we don't see very often. This is LC Bonanza. And if you've been growing orchids for a while, you probably have heard the name. When this hit the market, it was registered in 1949. This was B.O. Bracey's cross that he actually took with him when he started his own nursery. And he was allowed to take so many flasks, and this is one of the ones he took. And virtually when they started coming to show tables, everyone was awarded. They were that much superior over anything anyone had seen before. And when I was working on the Cattleya book, I had B.O. Bracey's hybrid book, and it was very fascinating to see the 2 parents of this cross used in every possible combination over about a decade. And I just always wondered, it'd been fun to speak with him in person to ask him what it was he saw in these 2 species that he thought were so perfect. And I think he got the right formula finally with this cross. And I looked up the number of hybrids that have Bonanza in the background, and it's over 2,000.
Wow.
It was just such a breakthrough Cattleya. And it's a 4N. It's a tetraploid, which also helped make it such a dominant Cattleya and dominant parent too. Okay, next. I've never seen this cross before. This
I
is
haven't
Guerente
either.
Hailstorm, Beringiana by Skinneri. So this is actually a combination, a primary cross of two Central American species. One blooms in the fall, that's Beringiana, and the other in the Skinneri, in the spring, that's Skinneri. And this has got the best of both. It looks like very high flower count. I don't know how big the plant is, but I'm guessing it's probably intermediate between the two. Just beautiful color, everything you would want. And I just keep thinking, boy, it'd be fun to make a cerulean cross with those two species. That's why I hate doing this. I get ideas for crosses that I have to have, and I have to make them first.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is beautiful. Steve's doing a phenomenal job. And I got a feeling this is one of those crosses that if you grow it up into a large plant, it'll stay in the pot and just produce massive numbers of flowers. A good one to get a CCM on.
Yeah.
Next slide. Brassivola nodosa. I noticed mine are coming into bloom. Although in my mind, I usually think of them as being more of a summer bloomer, but once the plant gets somewhat large, they just seem to be in bloom, at least with a few flowers, all the time. The Lady of the Night is the I guess the common name. And if you've got these outside and you walk out in your lanai or your greenhouse, you know why it's called that, because they are super duper fragrant. And the amazing thing about this particular species, it's been crossed with almost everything that you can imagine. And what's fascinating, not just that it dominates for shape, but also it produces spots on the lip most of the time. If you have this, if you take and turn the flower around and look at the back of the lip, you'll see spots, and those come through in the front of the flower on the lip for some reason, and make it always a fascinating parent. I hate to think about how many hybrids I have in my greenhouse with it, and continue to get more. Ask Alan if you really want to find somebody who really loves these things. Okay, next. I love this. Gulf Cream Hair Pig. This is Steve's. I've got this too. I can't remember if Steve got it from me, but I had a couple big divisions that had to go this year, and my plant is still monstrous. What's most fascinating about it, and when I first saw it, I thought this was a cross made with an unusual clone of Digbyana that has petals that are all frilly like this, but it wasn't. The frilly petals come from the Moscom, and in the background of it, I think two generations back, there is a species, Intermedia kinei, that causes this to happen. It causes the lip color and shape to be shown on the petals. So beautiful, beautiful. It's green, and as I said, it's really strikingly unusual just because of the petals, but the green color is also something that you want. Typically it'll get two flowers on a stem. They don't always open at exactly the same time, but they will both open, and if you've got room, you can grow these into big plants very fast with lots of flowers. Next. Catlianthe Varut Star Trek. This is beautiful, Sue. This is really interesting when you look at the background and all the species that are hiding back there. They all sort of have a little part in the color of the flowers, the shape of the flowers, and the size of the flowers. So you can see one inflorescence nicely open and a second one coming along too. You can see this is really a cluster of flowers, and the best type of this sort of orchid, when the cluster opens, basically it's covered all the way around. Flowers don't actually cover each other too much, but just sort of hide the space. Just really beautiful thing. As I said, there's a bunch of different species, 3 different yellow species in the ancestry. See clear as day is Cattleya, I guess Guerente or Rantiaca. Beautiful done. Sue, nice.
Yeah. It's got
Next.
curb appeal.
Oh, it definitely does. Definitely does. I'd walk across the greenhouse to see that one. Next. Catlianthe Dan O'Neill. That's Marianne Bell's. And again, Aurantiaca is glowing there. It's the time of year, that orange color, the number of flowers. It's just what Aurantiaca brings to hybrids. And it's why people still remake a lot of these hybrids. Dan O'Neill has been used to make a lot of hybrids. And I think I've got one in bloom in my greenhouse right now. I think that's one of the parents. On the right side are two crosses that are peloric. And I keep getting this question, what does peloric mean? What it basically means is that the color on the lip is magnified or presented on the petals. Typically, lip color in Cattleyas is different than the lip color on the petals. And this comes, as I mentioned earlier, from an unusual variety of Cattleya intermedia. It's called a Kinnii. And there are two things about it besides the lip arrangement and color. The other aspect of intermedia Kinnii is the petals are huge compared to most intermedias because the petals are trying to be the lip. And so not only do you get the color, but you get a large petal compared to the species. And there are also flares in Cattleyas that don't come from intermedia Kinnii. And the way you can always tell is if you look at the lip and you see that same color arrangement on the petals, then that's coming from a Kinnii. If you see a different color pattern on the petals than is on the lip, then those are actually flares and not coming from the intermedia in the background. There are a lot of advantages to having flares versus peloric flowers. The prime one being that because the petals are trying to be a lip, they tend to face forward and they have a real closed carriage, sometimes almost being cup-like. These are both very nice, and you can see on the bottom, that's Momolati Rainbow, one of my favorites. It comes in a variety of different colors, and each one has the same characteristic of the lip being imitated on the petals with respect to color. Really, really nice. Let's see, who's those? Marianne is the Dan O'Neill, Alan Black is the Miss Wonderful, and Patricia is the Momolati Rainbow. I think you've got a Momolati Rainbow, something like that, Sue.
Oh, yeah.
The yellow background is a favorite among people. Next, Hawaiian Lightning. I've got a Hawaiian Lightning. It's absolutely breathtaking. And Ceto Rainbow is also spectacular. And again, if I ask the question, what's the species in the background? And when we have real life meetings again, I'm going to start asking people. So you better be prepared to say intermedia Kinnii. It's so obvious. And the thing that's most amazing is it is a dominant trait. And so if you cross almost anything with intermedia Kinnii, 50% of the offspring will have this particular trait, at least. And it doesn't care what color is on the lip, it will project it on the petals. And so when you get some that have the Kinnii trait, they often look extremely different from the same cross, so that its siblings might look totally different because they don't get the color on the petals like this. Two beautiful clones. I do like the pelorics, even though I don't have space for any more that I currently have. But I'll buy them if I see them. Next, Peach Delight, Canemes Naranja. This is Leslie's. This has got a real subtle color to it. And that's probably coming from the Helen Valise. That's a really old clone. I think it was registered 1960 or somewhere around then. And it's been used a lot. Percivaliana is what we call the Christmas Cattleya because it typically blooms around Christmas. And you don't see it used a lot with very colorful parents or matched with colorful parents. But in this case, it's really nice. I can see both the species and the Helen in here. This is in my mind, one of the better Helen Belize clones I've seen, because I can tell how big the flowers are based on the size of the leaves and the hanger. Really, really nice. This is Leslie's.
Yeah, that color is to die for.
Yeah, that peach color is tricky. Take across and get 2 or 3 of them that come out peach, and some that are on the lavender side, some are on the darker side. And what can be fun is, particularly if the color is coming from Sophronitis coccinea, is that the color will be different depending on the temperature of the as the bud develops. So you can often have different color flowers on exactly the same parent, and there's no disease there. I get asked that question quite a few times. It's just the way the flower color develops. And sometimes they'll develop one color and all of them will change color through time too. Next. Carolina Splendor. Some of you may remember this from the last time, where officially Sue didn't know what it was. And the first time I saw that flower, I said, that's Carolina Splendor. And then I had second thoughts and thought maybe it was Lynette Splendor. But it turns out that this was a seedling that Sue got from Carter and Holmes, and they had a couple different crosses that are Carolina Splendor. And this is just a beautiful red. I don't quite know what else you could do to make it redder. So the story's unraveled. Maybe we'll have a whole article on the history of this at some point in time.
I think Keith should write that. He has the parentage down and the history of the plants. And
for those of you who just think, really, people do that? Yes. People have intimate knowledge of many of the different parents that are used and the different offspring that came out of it. And when you learn all of this and understand the nuance, it actually helps a lot in understanding what is going to happen when you use a particular clone as a parent. And this has been a spectacular parent. Kroll Smith has used it extensively, as has a number of the growers in Carolina. Next. Butterfly Kisses, Trick or Treat by Magnolia. And for those of you who go by a different name, Magnolia is also sometimes called Conopsium. And it's a little green species that grows here in Florida. And it has been used a lot to try and breed cold tolerance into Cattleya hybrids. Magnolia, I actually have seen growing in the wild in North Carolina. So it gets darn cold in North Carolina, I can promise you. And you can see the inflorescence type in here, because that's the characteristic of the species Magnolia. And Trick or Treat is a hybrid that comes from Araniaca, which is why it's blooming this time of year, and promotes that really nice orange color. Beautifully grown, Sue. And it looks like it's going to stay in this pot for a long time without, running off.
yep.
Perfect plant to grow into a specimen. Next. Barkeria. This is Barkeria olivata, right? Obovata. This is a Cattleya species from Mexico to Guatemala. The lip is really striking. I'm not sure I've ever seen this, or if I have, I don't remember it being so pretty. This is in the Cattleya Alliance, and Barkerias can be used to make hybrids with other Cattleyas. So, Alan, get to work. I can see all sorts of possibilities here, and that's probably why you've got it, because maybe I can even see some pods hanging somewhere there. No, just a bulb. Okay, go for it, Alan. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Next. Here we have 3 other members of the Cattleya Alliance. And I love having these here because so many growers who get started growing orchids, you see the standard be exposed to bifoliates, but there are so many different forms that come and color. On the left is Encyclia bonkiana. It's really pretty. I've never seen that one before. In the middle is Bardendrum petite. So 2 different members of the Cattleya Alliance, an Epidendrum and a Barkeria crossed together. And then on the right is Epidendrum corifolium. That's Allen's. And I've seen some beautiful specimen plants in shows of this. And you almost don't see it until all of a sudden it just jumps out at you as it's green. And then that color just sort of is so striking. But three beautiful representatives of the Cattleya Alliance. Next. Leptodes bicolor. This is a true miniature. Steve Dorsey is growing this on a piece of bark, and that is a perfect way to grow it. I grow these in pots, and they do fine until you repot them, and then you've got a year or so of them just not wanting to live. This is the way to do it. Grow them on a mount, or at least so that you do not have to repot them very often. And once they get established, they actually can take quite a bit of drought. This is a beautiful one. This is the species bicolor. There are a number of different species, equally pretty. Next. Bulbophyllum ambrosia. I have to tell you, Leslie, after last month's program, all about potting bulbophyllums and growing them, I do just about everything that you can wrong when it comes to growing bulbophyllums. They generally do okay, especially if they fall out of the pot underneath my bench. They usually go crazy once they do that. It's a really pretty one. It's got everything you'd want. The flowers are nicely separated, individual flowers, just perfect little striations. And if you were to blow one of these flowers up all by itself, everyone would want this particular species. Just really pretty. I know you're growing it probably wet because you love to water, but that's what bulbos really like. They like to be wet, and you can see the amount right up there in a basket. I can't see much in there, so I'm guessing you water all the time, Leslie, which I know is true. Next. What could be cuter than this guy? Saltatorum variety ciliatum. And you can see the way in which the growths come out of the individual bulbs and go everywhere. And we have, I guess, two different plants of this, right, Sue?
Yep, two different plants, Suzanne and Leslie.
Yeah, this is a bulbo growing group, that's for sure. But I love the photo at the bottom. All those little hairs just make this a spectacular thing. And what's the size of the flowers, Sue?
Oh, they're probably 1.5 inches tall.
How big they are. I just remember seeing all the frills on them. But that's really, really pretty. Just strikingly different. And that is why this is such an addictive hobby, because there's always something new to add to your collection, especially if you like little esoteric kind of things. Next. Chysis bractescens. This is Leslie's. Those beautiful flowers, crystalline white and that yellow contrast really nicely. We don't really see many people growing this particular group here. I know in North Carolina, there were a couple of people who just seemed to specialize, and they'd grow pretty large plants, and they always would win a blue ribbon in the shows, and often they'd get the best of show for a whole group. Just really nice. This is Leslie's too. I'm guessing it likes a lot of water.
Probably a good bet.
Next. Ludicea discolor. This is Janice Croft. These are typically just called jewel orchids. And there are people I've met who had one of these in the living room as a pot plant and didn't even know it was an orchid. They were just growing it for the foliage. And if you grow it under really low light, the leaves will be really darkly colored, and they may never bloom or just have a few flowers on an inflorescence. This looks like one of the very dark colored forms. There are some variations in the leaf color for this species that have been selected by those people who sell them. And I got a feeling this is one of the darker ones. I don't think that's just the light in this. It's certainly well grown. This is Janice's. That would do nicely on a table in your living room. Next. And this is how I grow mine. I forget about them. Then on the right-hand side are jewel orchids I discovered blooming under one of my benches. And I think what happened was when we had the big flood from the last hurricane. I'm trying to remember which one it was. These names start to mix up. But the last one I think was 4 years ago. My greenhouse got about a foot of water, and I do seem to remember having a pot of jewel orchids, one of which was the standard form, one of which was the alba form. And I'm guessing they floated around and eventually just dumped the plants under the pot, under the bench somewhere. And you can see that they don't need me to help them grow. You can see both the albinistic form in the foreground and some of the natural, the darker forms in the background. And I'll just leave them there. They'll just continue to do their thing. And if I ever need one, I know where they are. And then Steve Hawkins has one that's just got 32 flower spikes. And you can see how well they can be grown in culture, as opposed to mine that kind of look like they've gone wild, which they have. And I encourage wild things in my greenhouse. Next. Coleogeny. This is another one that we don't see very often here, but some coleogenies need a little cooler weather, but Flaccida is one that doesn't. It grows pretty well in heat. I used to have a pretty large plant, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which meant that it was taking up space that could be occupied by real orchids like Cattleyas. And then Cristata is another one. That's a white. The Flaccida has a little bit of color in it. I'm not sure if it's yellowish, how I'd call it, but the yellow in the lip sets it out and sets out the Cristata too. Fairly large flowers, and as you can see, they can be fairly floriferous on plants that get fairly large too. Just nice to see these being grown here. Next. Ornithocephalus gladiatus. This is Leslie's. This is a cute little thing. When I see it, it makes me think of some Oncidianae. I think that's probably where it belongs. I just can't remember.
It's not, they don't classify it with the Oncidiums.
Yeah, I don't know where you put it. Every time I've seen this, I haven't known what to do with it. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, we have it in the collectors group.
Well, that's a good place for it. And the only comment I have about this, the only negative comment is it would look pretty spectacular if it wasn't for the light background, because those flowers are really very pretty. And the light background, I guess that shade cloth, just kind of obscures the color of it. But clearly a very well grown plant. And it's Leslie, so I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very nice, Leslie. She's our esoteric expert. Dendrochilum, two different ones. Cobianum on the left up there. And I love the fact that the way that is shown, you really can see how the inflorescences can hang down and be spectacular. And this is just the beginning of how spectacular this plant can get, because they can become so dense that in maybe a few years, you hardly would be able to see the pot. They'll produce so many inflorescences all the way around. They can be delights in orchid shows. They can take up huge amounts of space in an exhibit too, in a big plant, because with all those inflorescences hanging down, you just don't need anything close by to take away from the beauty. And Wenzelii is Steve Dorsey's below. And take a look at how different the inflorescences are in terms of how far they reach from the plant. Still very, very beautiful, just a different way of displaying the inflorescence. The only trick to growing these is keep them wet. I have 3 or 4 of them that I've had for years. I used to grow them under my bench, sitting in water, and they grow really well. They just didn't flower as well as I wanted. And now I grow them on my bench with the phals and just keep them in a little tray that's always has water in it. They do thrive on really good water, but they're a little more tolerant of an occasional dose of poor quality water if you can't help it. So as long as you've got rainwater to throw on them every now and then, they should do okay for you. But beautifully grown, both. Next. Oh, no, we're done.
We're done. Thank you, Courtney. You were wonderful as you always are.
Well, it's always fun, and I'm really kind of excited to see these photos coming in from Washington State and various other places, because we'll get to see some orchids that we probably don't see very often here,
Yeah,
just
like
because of the climate.
I don't think we could grow the cristata here. That Sologeny. I don't think we could grow the cristata here.
As I said, a lot of these ones that are cool growing, if you have them and you are just bound and determined to grow them here, the trick is to keep them cool in the summertime. And the only real way to do that is to put them, under benches. I know people who've grown these in southeastern North Carolina, and they would put them under really dense live oaks, so that the live oak is producing all this cooling from both the shade and the evapotranspiration. And they would they would nurse them through the summers. And then once it got cool, they'd go crazy again. And there are a lot of techniques that people employ when they just have to grow some things that shouldn't be grown there. And you just have to try things. And also just to remember, the folks who developed the warm growing, what's the group I'm trying to think of from South Florida that Everglades orchids?
Oh, the
had-
oncidiums, and the cymbidiums.
Cymbidiums. They killed a lot of cymbidiums before they found some that were heat tolerant. And so if you really dedicate to making something grow where it shouldn't, just be prepared to kill a lot before you finally get to that point. It's just part of the fun of growing orchids. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Look
you,
forward
Courtney. You're
to-
wonderful. So
I look forward to seeing everybody on
April 6th.
April 6th. Yeah, there we go.
There, Courtney's going to talk about Cattleya species, including some of the underappreciated ones, and will be giving us insights on how the different characteristics of different Cattleyas are carried through in their offspring. So it'll be very interesting for us that like to buy seedlings and look at a plant tag and say, well, I wonder what that's going to be. And I think we'll have some new thoughts about that one after Courtney's talk.
There are a lot of species that are hiding in the backgrounds of Cattleya hybrids, and you just take it for granted that those characteristics come from the dominant species when in fact they don't. So we'll talk about a couple of the species that are, I won't say the only ones, but some of the ones that we'll of, and I'll be bringing. I think I've got a few more crosses I haven't brought in yet. They're just getting big enough to be potted up and to get distributed. So there'll be plenty to do. We'll have a lot of fun.
Oh,
See you
yeah.
in April.
See you in April.
Thanks
And I
again.
think,
Always good. Always good, Courtney.
Thank you.
Thanks
It's
so
fun.
much,
Thank you.
Courtney.
Don't
Thanks,
forget
Courtney.
Don't forget the show this weekend. It's
See you there.
Jacksonville Mandarin.
That sounds great. And send your pictures in by the end of the month for next month. And we'll see you all probably up in Jacksonville and then at the meeting in April.
The repotting clinic moving.
Yeah, well, it's going to be the second Tuesday and second Saturday instead of the first Saturday because there's going to be an Easter egg hunt at the church. So we're going to be pushing back the repotting clinic to the second Saturday. So thank you all. Thank you, Courtney.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.